Let's take a step back to where it all began. The luxury car tax, or LCT, was introduced in 1999, and back then, the intention was, well, it was to protect the Australian car manufacturing industry. The idea was that imported luxury vehicles would face a higher tax burden, giving locally made cars, from brands like Holden and Ford, a fair shot in the market.
Yeah, but we know how that turned out, don't we? By 2017, poof, no more local car manufacturing. And yet here we are, still paying this 33% tax. It's almost like we got stuck in a time warp or something.
Exactly. Now here's what's tricky. The thresholds for the tax were set at $80,000 for standard cars and $91,000 for fuel-efficient ones. But with inflation, that isn't much of a luxury anymore, is it? Cars like the Toyota Prado and even some Hyundai SUVs like the Palisade get slapped with this tax. It's no longer just about high-end brands like BMW or Audi.
Oh, speaking of Audis and all the other fancy imports, I've got a story for you. So, you know when I was a kid, right? Growing up working on cars in my dad's workshop?
Uh-oh, here we go.
Nah, it's a good one. I remember this bloke bringing in an old Jag he was restoring. Absolute legend of a car. Now, back then, that thing would have been proper fancy. Fancy enough to, pay this so-called luxury tax today. But the hilarious part, at the time, no one would have dreamed of calling it luxury. We just called it a project car.
That's so true. And that's part of the frustration, right? A lot of these vehicles being hit with the LCT now aren't even considered luxury anymore. They're family cars or workhorses. Yet the tax continues to rake in over $1 billion a year for the government.
And hey, don't forget, it's not just stitches in the wallet for buyers. It makes the newer, safer, more fuel-efficient cars harder to justify. That's the real kicker. Like, why tax a vehicle that burns less petrol? It's backwards, isn't it?
Absolutely. The LCT might have made sense at the time it was introduced, but with no local industry to protect anymore, you've got to wonder, what's the point? And now, it's even impacting Australia's trade relationships, which we'll get into. And speaking of its broader impacts, the luxury car tax doesn't just hit home. It's become a major point of contention internationally too. The European Union, for instance, sees it as a substantial barrier to free trade, especially when it comes to their car imports. They've been arguing for its removal during recent trade agreement negotiations, calling it outdated and unfair.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a sting if you're Audi or BMW, right? Imagine being taxed twice. First the 5% import duty, and then this 33% LCT on top of that. It's like getting hit with a double whammy. No wonder the EU's so cranky about it.
Exactly. And this pressure has now turned the LCT into a potential bargaining chip. The Australian government is reportedly considering scrapping it altogether if it means better access to European markets for our agricultural exports. Think about it. Wheat, beef, wine, all reaching Europe without extra trade barriers.
It's wild though, isn't it? We're talking about ditching a tax pulling in over $1 billion a year. That's not small change. You reckon they'll replace it with something else to make up for the lost revenue?
That's the $1 million, or should I say $1 billion question. If they do, it could shift costs in other ways, maybe even hitting dealerships indirectly. I mean, in my years on the sales floor, I've seen how sensitive buyers can be to price hikes, even minor ones. If this tax disappears and gets replaced with, say, higher registration fees or other charges, it could still spook potential buyers.
And then there's the dealership stock, right? Could get tricky for places importing premium models, not knowing if the tax changes will actually go through or not. Whole system might need a rethink.
It's already creating ripples, no doubt. But here's another angle. If the LCT does go, a lot of these so-called luxury vehicles might actually become attainable. That means more movement of European cars in our market, and perhaps less reliance on older, less efficient models.
Something tells me, though, knowing how governments work, they won't let us off that easy. There'll be strings attached, or maybe, a new tax altogether.
Probably. And speaking of efficiency, the government's already making moves there, tightening the criteria for fuel-efficient vehicles under the LCT thresholds. That'll hit hybrids and even some electrics harder. But we should dig into that. Next, as we were saying, the government's not just considering scrapping the luxury car tax. They're also ramping up the standards for what qualifies as a fuel-efficient vehicle, dropping the limit from 7 litres per 100 kilometres to 3.5 next July. That's going to leave plenty of hybrids, and even some plug-ins, out in the cold. What do you think, Brody?
Yeah, it's like a moving goalpost. I mean, hybrids used to be, the golden ticket. Now they're being sidelined before we even really got everyone on board. How does that make sense when we're trying to go greener?
Exactly. It's what the AADA and FCAI have been hammering home. They see this whole thing as a step backwards. If the government really wanted to push low-emission technology, why make it more expensive? The AADA's James Vortman even called it an archaic system. Strong words, but he's not wrong.
Nah, he's spot on. Honestly, it feels like they're shooting themselves in the foot. And speaking of feet, did I ever tell you about the first time I got my hands on a hybrid?
Oh boy, here we go.
No, it's a good one. So, picture this. I'm about 16, working in Dad's workshop, and a customer rolls in with this shiny new Prius. This is back in, the early 2000s. Anyway, I pop the hood, expecting, just another petrol engine. But nope, I'm staring at wires and all sorts of tech that looks straight out of a spaceship. And mate, I was hooked. That car ran circles around the old clunkers we were used to, whisper quiet and hardly drank any fuel. It was like, boom, a whole new world.
That's a great example, actually. Hybrids, especially in those early days, were such a revelation. And now, just as they've become more reliable and attainable for families, they're being pushed out of the conversation. It's frustrating, especially when cleaner tech should be a priority.
Oh, totally. And it's not like people are rushing to replace their cars every year. Make it harder to afford hybrids and clean cars. And what happens? Folks stick with the old gas guzzlers. It's a no-win, really.
And that's where the FCAI's argument really lands. They've called for the LCT to be scrapped outright, not just updated to make way for proper incentives. Their gist is, stop punishing buyers and start helping them. It makes so much sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Like, imagine if instead of all this tax talk, they said, all right, here's how we'll help you switch to an EV. It'd change the game. But, as always, the question is where the dollars will come from, right?
Right. And whether it's through tax shifts or government incentives, the industry and buyers need clarity. There's a lot at stake for everyone, especially as we move toward a future of net zero emissions. But for now, at least, the LCT debate is forcing some much-needed conversations about what it means to be efficient, affordable, and future-ready.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, I reckon we've given people plenty to chew on for today. What do you think?
Absolutely. As always, it's been great diving into this with you. Thanks for sticking with us, everyone, and until next time, drive safe and stay curious.
Cheers, folks. Catch you next time.